Check. All right. Are you guys ready? Sounds like discussions are ongoing. Great. It's awesome. Well, first of all, welcome to ServiceNow. I know it's a very, very hot day, hot week, but thank you all for braving it in. Really excited to have you. We have, first of all, I'm Anand Tarnathan. I lead the UX research organization here at ServiceNow. I've been here a little over 2 years now, and I'm based out of the Santa Clara, this office. So before we get started and before I do a quick intro, big shout out to Alec and the Learners team. Thank you for co-hosting this. Woohoo! Always a great partnership. Really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. A big shout out and thank you to the panelists who you will meet very soon. We have an amazing set of leaders on the panel, and it'll be moderated by Shibani. So I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to learning from that. And so that's part one. And then we'll have a presentation from Shibani next on impact. Research is, I'm assuming a lot of you are researchers. One of the most challenging parts of our craft is how we communicate the impact we drive. And a lot of times it's anecdotal, it's sometimes in the form of excerpts. And we at ServiceNow have been a little bit more intentional trying to really quantify and document the way we are driving impact. And you're going to hear some of that from Shibani. And I think I've been doing this for over 2 decades now. And I think it's a really, really strong step in the right direction. So I'm excited for all of you to hear how we're doing that and how we're thinking about it. But before I hand it over to Shibani, how many of you know about ServiceNow as a company beyond the spelling? Okay, that's getting better every time I talk to you all. So this is very exciting. But a quick, I know there's a lot of folks online as well. Hello, everybody. Really brief introduction. ServiceNow, we've been around for 20 years, a little over 20 years. We're one of the fastest growing enterprise tech companies in the space. We started off in the IT service management space, but over the last 20 years, we've spanned across, you literally name any division in enterprise, and we're there. Be it customers, customer success, employee experience. You're going to hear from Sancho, who leads our employee experience business, part of it. We're in finance and supply chain. We're in creators, you name it, anywhere in the enterprise. But we're a platform company. So we go to market with our platform, which is extremely flexible, intelligent. And as a company, we've made a strategic shift to focus on AI. Who doesn't? Who hasn't, right? So I encourage all of you to stay back after the set of presentations. There's a few folks from our team here. Talk to us, learn about us. We're continuing to grow. We're, as I said, a growth stage company, not only financially, but also people-wise, because we need really smart talent to deliver on a lot of the demand we're having from our customers. So I encourage all of you to learn more about us and how we work. We're continuously voted as one of the best places to work. So keeping aside all the marketing jargon, I love it here. I've been in multiple companies and I love it here, and I'd love to talk to you all about some of the ways we do research here, how we collaborate with our PM organization, our design organization, our content organization, marketing, name it all. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Shibani, and she's got a pretty stellar bio that I'm going to read out. Shibani Shah. Shibani has held various roles in UX research for her entire career, working on near-term products to futuristic concepts, looking 10 plus years out. Her career has spanned from enterprise software, shadowing call center agents, to building and running research programs in consumer hardware and software, to coming full circle, running research within the enterprise software space again. Shibani has been with ServiceNow for over 5 years. It's a veteran. And leads the customer and industry workflows. Insights team and customer industry workflows is one of our fastest growing businesses. So welcome, Shibani, and let's rock and roll.
Thank you. All right, let me make sure this is in presentation mode. Right, well, thank you all for coming here in person, and for those who are joining on the live stream, thank you for being here. So as Anand said, I'm Shivani Shah, and while I'm alone up here talking about this topic on measuring research impact, I have not been alone in this effort. This has been a lot of people across the entire company who have contributed to this effort, and I want to give a special shout out to my colleagues, Elizabeth, Preston, and Paul, for their immense contributions to this. So with that, I want to start off with a little story. So I first started thinking and hearing about impact. This was fairly early on in my career. I happen to be at Intel, and we have a review process, our annual review process there, where we have to write our annual, our self-assessments. How many of you have to write your self-assessment? Yeah. Boy, I wish I had ChatGPT back then. Um, so we even had a word count limit that we had to reach. And so I would spend hours writing and wordsmithing this document and writing about all of the accomplishments I had that year, writing in much detail all the projects I had done, and I sent it to my manager, and he sent it back, and he says, "You need to add more detail." So again, I'm wordsmithing, really keeping that word count in mind, not to go over that. And I send it back, and then again, he sends it back to me. And this exchange is going on 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, finally, I went to him and I said, "What's going on? What am I missing?" And he says, "Shivani, you're not talking about any of the impact that you're having with your work." And so that's when I started thinking that, oh, not only do I have to be writing about the impact, I actually need to know about the impact that my work is having. And so this is not just relevant to our self-assessments, right, in our companies, but this is also relevant to our resumes. There's a lot of information, a lot of advice out there around how do you write impactful statements in your resume? How do you quantify the work and the accomplishments that you've had? Because you really want to stand out from the pile of resumes that recruiters get. And last year, Anand, thank you, gave me this task, asked me to lead this mission that was given to us by our Chief Experience Officer, Amy Loki. And the mission was to define a measurement to assess the impact the UX research organization had across the business. And so this was great. I had been thinking about impact for a while now, but I hadn't quite been thinking about it from an organizational perspective at that point. So this talk is going to focus mostly on the organizational aspect and what we did to accomplish this mission. But a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today is are things that I have learned over the years in my journey of figuring out how to write about impact myself. So this is relevant to you, whether you are like I was early in my career, thinking about impact and figuring out and trying to figure out how do I even write about it. Or maybe you're a team of one and you're looking to show the value back to your organization to see if you can grow your team. Or if you're like us and we're a 130 plus research organization now, and we are wanting to show our value back to the business as well. Okay, so let me take you on our journey of how exactly we solve this. So there's a lot packed into this mission statement. So the first thing was we had to break it down into some of the key elements here. So the first one was impact. We really had to align on what a definition of impact was. Second was measurement. What is that one measure that was really going to encapsulate all of the impact that we were having as an organization? And then the third thing was, how do we scale this across the entire organization, across all of ServiceNow? So I'll take you through each of these step by step. So let's start with the first one. So the question we were asking ourselves is, how do researchers create impact? What does impact even mean for a researcher? So thankfully, there is actually quite a bit of research out there. There's a lot of documentation. Our UX research community is very smart. And there's a lot of publications. So like any other good researcher would do, we started with a lit review. And we read a whole bunch of information out there. We drew on our own experience, and we found out that a lot of people were saying essentially the same thing in many different words. So we boiled it down to a definition of what we thought would resonate well within our company of what research impact really means. And if you look up the word impact itself in the dictionary, it means to have a direct effect on something or someone. When it comes to research, what this means is that researchers create impact by influencing decisions that achieve a desired business outcome. So again, a lot packed in there. I'll say that again. Researchers create impact by influencing decisions that achieve a desired business outcome. And we felt like this did a really good job of summarizing all of the learnings we had, all the things that we had read about in our lit reviews. But what this means is that we really need to understand where the business is going. We have to be answering relevant questions that the business is asking. We have to understand where the company's strategy is so that we can be answering questions and providing data that matter to them. Okay, so we got the definition done. Next was figuring out, what is this measurement? What is that indicator that we could have that'll really encapsulate everything that we as an organization are doing, and we can show that? Well, it turns out that there is actually no one measure. When we think about impact, there are so many things that as a research organization we are doing, and it's really hard to encapsulate that in any one measure. So we did a bunch of stakeholder interviews, and again, a bunch of lit reviews, and we categorized these indicators into 4 key areas. So first was quantifying the work. And this just meant like we needed to look at all of the volume of work that we were generating. But then thinking about how is that work impacting the product? What action is being taken based off of the work that we did? And then evaluating the experiences based off of those actions that were taken. Have the experiences gone up? Have we improved them? And then measuring our own value back to our own customers, who are our stakeholders, our internal stakeholders. So I'll go through these one by one to give you a sense of the kind of indicators that we were included in each of these categories. But this is not going to be an exhaustive list. This is just the kinds of things that we've been thinking about. So the first one is, very simply, how many research projects have we completed? But this, just like I said early in my career, this alone is not going to help with showing the impact. Thinking about the number of users who we have engaged with. And this could be the number of users who you have spoken with. This could be the number of users you have surveyed. Just thinking again about the volume of people who you have included in your research. And then if you're like us, we're a very, very customer-driven company. So for us, thinking about who those top customers are is really, really important. So anytime we can show that, hey, we've spoken to these number of top customers in any given period of time, that's really great for us. And then also thinking about the project backlog. Now, this might not be an intuitive indicator to include here, but we included it because this helps us understand the demand on our organization. It's a proxy for us to understand what kind of demand is our company putting on our organization that we are not able to support with the current resources that we have. But that just means that they really love the work that we're doing and they want more of it. And so on. So you could come up with a whole number of other indicators that make sense for you and your organization, but that's to give you an idea of what quantifying the work means. So the next one is tracking action. And this is thinking about, what are the number of insights that you might have generated from your research project that have been adopted by the business? And then thinking about, once those have been adopted, how many product requirements have been created based off of those insights that have been adopted? And in our world, I don't know how it is for all of you, but our engineering requirements are in the form of epics, stories, and such. And then again, similar to a project backlog, we also want to look at our insights backlog. This is our area of opportunity for the business that we as a research organization have uncovered. This is an area where our product managers or our designers can come to and they can say, well, if we want to improve our product experience, what do we do? Well, here's a product backlog, or here's an insights backlog that we can start to tackle. And then also looking at the rate of action, meaning how many actions have been released or per release. And what this helps us understand is what is the rate of the uptake of our insights every release. So we might say, hey, the most recent release might have had more insights adopted compared to the previous release. That means we're having more impact in that particular release. Okay, and so on. The next one is around evaluating experiences. So once action has been taken, these insights have been incorporated into the product, we want to understand how has it moved the needle on the actual end user experience. And so we have very standardized controlled studies that we run here, which are called UX quality assessments. And we gather a number of different scores here, so like our usability score, design quality, we measure our task success rates, we look at the time on task and such. But that's really helping us release over release to be able to measure how we are doing and how the impact of our research insights led to the action that ultimately led to a better or not better, but that's exactly why we need to run these experiences. And then the next one is measuring our value. And this really goes down to thinking about how are we positioning ourselves and how are our stakeholders thinking of us within the organization. And these could include things like what kind of value, what do our product decision makers, what do they think about the value that we're adding to their ability to make product decisions? Or the timeliness of the insights that we're providing to them. Are we getting there right in time so that they can make the product decisions that they need to be making in the time that they need to make it in? Or are we too late to the party? And then their overall satisfaction with the quality of the work that they're getting or the quality of the relationships that they have with us. And then their likelihood to engage with us in the future. Okay, and so on. So altogether, we've got these 4 categories and a number of different indicators within them that holistically give us this view of what research impact means for us as a research organization. But this might not all be relevant to you or your organization. So something for you to think about is what are those indicators that make the most sense for you within your world? Okay, so moving on to the business. Now this, I will say, of all the 3 things, this was the hardest part for us. There were a lot of challenges in figuring out how we scale this across the entire business. Us as individuals, it was relatively easier to say, okay, here's what I did, but then how do we do this across the entire organization with the number of different products that we have, the number of different teams that we are supporting? So I won't go through every single challenge because there was a lot, but I'll go through the 3 main ones that we faced. So the first one is that our insights were really siloed. Our researchers, we create research reports, and these could be in PowerPoint decks, they might be in a Miro, they might be in Word docs, and they live all over the place. So it's really hard for us to figure out and quantify how many insights are we generating as a research organization. There's no way to calculate that, no way to measure that. And the second one is it was hard to track the action. We didn't know how one insight led to one product decision. And so we had to actually manually go back. We would go back like 3 months after a release, we might go back and say, hey, PM, what happened with that insight that I shared with you about 3 months ago? And they'd have to rack their brains and think, oh, what did I do with that? What kind of decision did that help me make at that time? So it was really hard. It was manual. It probably wasn't very accurate either. And then the next one was, as you saw, we have a lot of these indicators, right? But they all live in a lot of different places. So how do we bring it all together and put it in one consolidated view so it was easy for us to summarize and see the kind of impact that we were having as an organization? So fortunately, we were able to solve all of these problems, and even better, we solved it with our ServiceNow products. So for the very first one, our challenge around insights being siloed, we are using our own product, which is called Strategic Portfolio Workspace. And we're using this to store all of our research insights. So the process that we have in place in our organization is that as soon as a researcher completes a research project, they log their insights here in this repository. And this way, because it's all centralized, it is like one gigantic database where anybody could come in, they could look across any time period, they could filter based off of persona, based off of the product, the business unit that they were interested in. They could really look at this from any way that they wanted to, because it's all organized in one central repository. And even better, and I'm happy to share this, as of our latest release, which is called our Xanadu release, we have our Gen AI capability called Now Assist integrated into SPW, Strategic Portfolio Workspace, where anybody could come in, they can click on a few of these records, and it generates a summary for them. So this is not only helpful for us as a research team, but really helpful for our cross-functional partners too. So imagine a PM wanting to know, what do they prioritize? Or of the 100 insights that they have, that they've been given by their research partners, how do they know what to prioritize? How do they know what to figure out, what to do about? And this really helps them. Okay, so the next challenge was hard to track action. And like I said, we really had no tool to do this. And our process was, so we have, our own homegrown tool on ServiceNow platform to be able to log our research projects. And once those projects are completed, our researchers log the insights. But this is where we needed the help here. This is where the challenge was, where we had no ability to connect those insights to any specific product requirement, which means we weren't able to quantify the impact. And so thankfully, again, using that exact same product, Strategic Portfolio Workspace, it's a little tiny there on the screenshot, but on the top right, there's a green box there that says Link Product Idea. So this is where we can take our insights and we can link it to a product requirement like a story or epic, and that's what we can use then to measure how many of our insights got adopted and how many of those resulted in some sort of product outcome. All right, and then the last one, which was around having no high-level view. And so we've created this dashboard. Unfortunately, I can't, for confidentiality reasons, show you what exactly that dashboard looks like, but imagine it looks very similar to this. So now we have a dashboard that summarizes automatically what each of those indicators that we talked about in one view. All right, so I've been talking a lot about ServiceNow products, but I want you to know that this doesn't have to be only on a ServiceNow product. You could use any tool. This really is a spectrum. So you could start with something that is just as rough as a Miro or a Word document or a PowerPoint. Or you might use something more mature, like a Excel or Airtable or Smartsheets, where you can automatically generate reports from there. Or you might have the ability to have more automated tools like ServiceNow, Tableau, or Power BI. But don't let the tooling stop you. Just start tracking. Start tracking your work with whatever tool you've got. Okay, so we talked about the insight. We aligned on a definition. We figured out all of the measurements, all of those indicators that we need to put in place. And we even figured out the tooling. So we thought, okay, this is great. We got it all figured out. But then what happens if nobody's going to use it? There's no process in place. So we needed to figure out, how do we operationalize this across our whole 130-person organization? And there were a lot of processes that we ended up putting in place. But I'm going to share one with you that I think has really moved the needle for us. And I chose this particular one because in my career, I've seen that, and we even here at ServiceNow, we fail to do this part of the process, which is really following through on the research results. And so I'll share more about this. And what we're calling this is dispositioning rituals. And no, we didn't make the name up, disposition. It's an existing term. What it means is to transfer to the care, possession, or ownership of another. And so when we're thinking about this in terms of research impact, what this means is that we want to dedicate time. We want to dedicate time to align on action based on the research insights. So what happens typically is that someone might log a research record, they'll complete it, they'll complete the research project, they'll log their insights, but then it's this piece that gets missing. We're not able to track the action then, and therefore we're not able to quantify the impact that we've had on the product. And so this is where the dispositioning rituals come into play. So something for you to think about too in your own worlds too is how can we have intentional conversations? How can you have intentional conversations about insights that lead to some kind of action so that those insights are not sitting on a shelf somewhere and collecting dust? But you need to be able to carve out that time, that space to do it. But it also means that it's a shift in our practice. It's a shift from going from running a research project, doing your readout, and then going away. You have to stay connected with your team. You have to follow through and continue along on that journey with your cross-functional teams. So there are 3 considerations for healthy dispositioning rituals, and it's these dispositioning rituals that really help us stay connected throughout the process. So I'll go through each of these. So the first one is timing. This might seem a random question, but I promise it's very relevant. How many of you are familiar with the development cycle in your companies? Okay, well, that's great. That's really awesome. And in order for us to maximize the value, maximize the impact that we're having in our organizations, it's really important for us to understand this development cycle. And so I'm going to give you an example of what one such development cycle might look like. So this is a quarterly release cycle. We often follow this at ServiceNow, and we have planning sessions. These happen at the beginning of the quarter. And for these dispositioning rituals, what we want to make sure we're doing is figuring out when those planning sessions are happening and bringing our research insights from the previous quarters or quarter, as well as the backlog, into those discussions. It is that moment in time when your cross-functional partners are open, they're thinking, they're listening, they have the mental capacity to actually hear you out. Because sometimes if you catch them in the middle of a release cycle, it can get pretty busy. They're already so preoccupied with things. And I'm not saying don't do this even after your research readout, but continue to do it. Stay involved even after your research readout. And this is when you can stay involved and you'll have a lot more impact here in these moments. And so you want to do this every single time there is a new planning session. You want to keep bringing in your insights, and keep showing up, keep bringing that backlog back into view. Because your cross-functional partners have a lot going on. They may not remember, so it's your job to remind them and to resurface those insights. So something for you to think about is, that's great that so many of you know what the development cycle is, but think about what is the cadence of these planning sessions? When does that happen? How often are those occurring? And can you get yourself in that room? Can you be prepared for those conversations and be there to share those insights? Okay, so the next one is insights. Now, having a really, really clear perspective on what the insight is that you found will really help your team focus on the action that needs to be taken. And to have a really well thought out insight means that it has to have a few elements. And so we've come up with this statement here. It's a generic statement, but it goes like this, which is a persona that we've studied, experiences a particular problem because of this reason. And as a result of this is the consequence. And this really helps your cross-functional teams understand and empathize with why this is a problem for this persona and why does it matter so much to solve this. What is that problem? What is that pain that it's causing them? And you may be familiar enough with the product space where you have the ability to come up with your own action based off of that insight. And that's great. You, by all means, should be providing your perspective on what you think the recommendation is here. But in some cases, you may not. And that's okay too. But this is where you really need to be bringing in your cross-functional partners together to be discussing that action. But it is your responsibility as the person who is the closest to the end user to be that voice of the user and really clearly articulate what that insight is. What is that user problem? And so you might have many such insights, and that's great. But again, here, you need to have a very clear perspective on what is the priority of those insights. If your organization is anything like ours, we might generate 10 insights from any given study, but only 5 are going to make it into the next release. So we have to be very mindful and very clear about what is the priority of the insights that we believe should be going into the next release. And you present that priority to your team. Okay, so let's say you've prioritized these insights and you bring them into these dispositioning rituals. Let's say you're in your Q1 planning session with your team. And what might happen is you're having a collective discussion with your team members, and they might take an insight, and your PM might say, hey, this is a really great idea. Let's plan for this. Let's put this in our very next release, in our Q1 release. Awesome, that's action. And that's adoption. The next one, maybe they'll say, hey, this is not quite as clear to me, or I'm not quite convinced with that. I need some more information, I need more data. So maybe you need to go back and you need to design another study. And maybe that's going to take you a couple quarters, but you need to remember to come back in a couple quarters and bring that back again in the next planning session. And maybe that it was a good idea, but they don't have time for it in that particular release. They say, let's just put that in the backlog. But then it's, again, your responsibility to bring that backlog back into view. Don't let your teams forget about it. And maybe you have an insight that's really great, and they do want to adopt it, but at a future release. But that's great, that's still a win. And in some cases, they might come back and say, well, maybe this doesn't make sense for our business. Maybe the timing's not right. Let's not pursue this, but that's okay. But look, because you have dedicated the time to have these sort of dispositioning rituals, you now have action against all 5 of your insights. And that's what this purpose of this particular dispositioning ritual is. And last, but certainly not least, is collaboration. We have a value here at ServiceNow, which is win as a team. And we hold this true even as researchers, and we know that collaboration is so important when we are conducting research. We want to bring our partners in for observing these sessions, but it's true even after. Right? We really want to maintain those partnerships with our stakeholders, and if they don't like you for whatever reason, well, you have to figure that out, and you have to build that partnership, you have to build that relationship with them, because then they will listen. So an example of a collaborative process might look something like this. You might come up with your research report, and you do this big presentation to the broad team of people. And then you may want to invite a smaller group of those decision makers into a room to have a deeper discussion. And this is where you bring in your prioritized list of insights, and you reshare those. And you have a deeper discussion then about what is the action that we can take based off of these insights. And you want to document those decisions. Because once you've documented it, then you know that's something that you can actually measure. And also, very, very important, maintain a backlog. You may not get 100% adoption in that first go, and that's okay. But maintain that backlog so then you can follow up on those insights. So again, here, there is a spectrum. You know your stakeholders best. There are some of our teams that have very formal dispositioning workshops. They have all sorts of templates and such. And that works for them and their stakeholders. In some cases, maybe there isn't time to do that. Maybe they're just leveraging a recurring team meeting that they have to have those discussions. Or in some cases, maybe there isn't enough time to align with everybody because maybe everyone's on different time zones, or it's difficult to find one single time where everybody can get into a room together. Whatever that reason might be, maybe you just choose to do asynchronous communication. But that's okay too. So again, just like tooling, collaboration and communication is on a spectrum too. So we talked about having very clear insights. Oh, and so something for you to take away and think about is what collaboration model really works best for you. There really is no one way, right? Everyone's stakeholders are different. Everyone's relationships with their stakeholders are different. So coming back to our definition of research impact, we talked about timing. And like I said, timing is so important to be able to be in the room, to be able to influence those decisions. But you also have to have that clear insight. If you're not coming in with a clear point of view, no one's going to hear you. And then really having those strong stakeholder partnerships. Develop those relationships. Those are really, really key. And that is how you will start to influence those decisions, which will then ultimately achieve a business outcome, which ultimately will lead to research impact. Okay, so I've said a lot of things about measuring research impact, but if there are only 3 things that you take away today from my talk, it's first that you need to identify the indicators that make sense for you. Whether you're an individual trying to show impact for yourself, for your own work, or you're an entire organization, you're representing an organization and you're trying to do this for the team. Figure out what those indicators make sense for you. And then don't let the tooling slow you down. Use any tooling that you've got, any tool that you have. Start tracking. And timing and collaboration are key. If you miss those windows, or if you don't have good partnerships, you're not going to be able to influence those decisions. Okay, with that, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Do you need a mic?
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you very much for that. That's awesome. My question is kind of roadmap specific. What are some challenges that a disposition ritual could cause in terms of the roadmap? I'm kind of concerned that as a mid-level researcher, I don't have a whole lot of influence, even though I would try to, take your collaboration advice. But I could see a potential for some insights that might be really, really big insights to maybe greatly affect the roadmap. But given that it's already kind of set by executive leadership sometimes, I didn't really form the question very well before.
No, I think I get what you're saying. I think sometimes we come up with these really meaty insights, right? And sometimes our roadmaps are already set. And that happens. It happens here as well. So what I would suggest is start the conversations. And you might have to have the conversation once, maybe 5 times, maybe 10 times. Maybe you'll need to gather more data to back that decision up. But the more you talk about it and the more you show the importance of it, the more you show up at those planning sessions talking about why this is so important for us to solve, the more you're going to be heard. But just don't give up.
Keep on keeping on.
Keep it on.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Very insightful. My question is regarding, I think you're like director level and maybe you interact with a lot of like leadership or executives. So I'm curious from the perspective of like executive or like leadership level, which type of research impact or indicators they will use to like evaluate the research work or say, I will give them more headcount or resources?
Well, we have a lot of executives in the room, so maybe this is something they can answer too. But I'll start and I'll see if anyone else wants to chime in. So when we were reviewing these indicators and trying to figure out whether these make sense for us as an organization, we did roadshow them with a number of different people. And honestly, I got different reactions from different people depending upon their perspective and their lens at that time. So I had like a VP of product management looking at the indicators, all of the indicators, and saying the one that he zoned in on was like, oh, this is going to be able to help me understand whether you're working on the right products or not for my portfolio. Are you spending the kind of resources and doing the number of projects that I expect you to be doing for that particular product? And then I shared it with someone else who happened to be in design. And they said, well, I really want to know what the UX quality is. I want to know what our usability scores are. And then someone else said, well, I want to figure out what we're going to be prioritizing for the next release. So they want to look at the backlog. So everybody kind of comes at it from a different perspective. And that's one of the reasons why we thought, well, we can't really narrow down on any one indicator. Everyone's kind of looking at it, and any different moment in time too. They might also change their lens depending upon what's important to them at that moment in time. But I want to see if anyone else wants to chime in on that answer. Well, you're all going to be on the spot in the panel in just a minute, so. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go for an question online, and then I'll come back to you. This is a question from Aliyah. Who are the people who were quickest to adopt and appreciate your tracking system?
So we have our chief experience officer who has been using certain metrics and sharing these metrics with her own peers, which has been great. I would say she's probably one of our early adopters of this work. But we are still in the early phases, I will be honest. We're still in the early stages of this, of putting it in practice across the entire ServiceNow organization. So there are pockets of traction. I will say some of the UX quality scores, people really like those. And it's really helped to show our improvement on the usability of products release over release. So there are certain pockets where certain product areas are really keen on seeing those things and have included some of these indicators in their own OKRs as well.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for a very insightful session just now. I do have a question about the dashboard, kind of following up with the online question there. I guess just wondering, in the early stages of setting that up, did you have a tough conversation with some of the PMs? Because sometimes, you know, having those insights in your backlog in the research team can mean more work for the product managers. So I was wondering, how did you kind of align that kind of like healthy discussion with them, working towards, you know, the same goal here?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we do have some product managers here. So, but I don't know if that has ever been a problem. I think the only problem has been come with a clear perspective. If we're just throwing insights at them without any perspective on what's important, that's when it becomes a problem. But I think we're all here to make our products better. And so everyone knows that we're doing this for the right reasons. But really making sure that we are not just throwing everything at the wall, right? And not uploading everything in there, but really being conscious about what are the most important things and really making sure that we're crafting our insights in a very clear way.
Yeah. I'll give you two words, collaboration and empathy. But I loved seeing collaboration on Shibani's slide, because ultimately, it is a conversation, right? You're going to have your perspective in terms of the priorities, for example, of the insights, but you have to align those with the business priorities in a particular release. For example, as you're looking quarter over quarter, there are particular problems that they're trying to solve. It does not devalue the insights that you've identified. They're just not a priority for that release. And multiple times I've had experiences where it's almost a year later and we come back to it like, we know it's a problem. It's not we don't know it's a problem. It's just that's not what we're trying to solve for right now. So I think that approaching it with that collaborative sort of attitude and then empathy for the other person's role. So you're not coming in saying, this is the most important insight, but it's like, this is the biggest challenge I heard from our users or from the persona we're researching. And then having the conversation of where does this rank in priority relative to the business problems that you're trying to solve overall, and then in a particular time frame.
Thanks, Sancho. You want to just introduce yourself too, so that they know
Sure.
where you're coming from?
So Sancho Pinto, I'm a VP of product at ServiceNow, responsible for our employee experience products. I've been partnering with research for a long time, so enjoying this conversation.
Thanks, Sancho. Well, he's one of the great collaborators for us. Okay, here's another question, Shibani. It's an interesting one. From Jillian. Most stakeholders want impact in dollars. How can this process be used to provide monetary ROI?
Very good question. This is something that did come up when we were brainstorming all of the indicators. For us, in our organization, the dollar value was a little bit more challenging because we couldn't attribute that directly to our research organization. There are a lot of teams that are involved in bringing in the revenue for the company. So it was hard for us to show that as an indicator. But I would say that that's a good indicator. If you have a direct correlation with the dollar amount, then that's great. But there are, I mean, like I said, there are so many other ways that you could be thinking about it as well. But yeah, it's honestly it was a path that we were going to start to go down, and then we realized, oh, I can't really do that, not for us.
One more question online, and then if there's one more in the room, we can take it. So this is from Anchal. How do you approach setting a research roadmap across the business to ensure that each initiative has a measurable impact?
It's a good question. I think you need to start with what's the business trying to achieve? Is there some sort of target that they're trying to meet? Maybe it's around the user experience. If it's not, could it be? Could it be around achieving a specific usability measure or improving the efficiency of the product? So I think that's the first conversation, is regardless of what you have going on across the organization, just trying to figure out, what does success mean? How do you measure success? And that indicator is going to change depending upon what that product is, depending upon where that company is at that moment in time, what they're trying to achieve. So I would start with just having a conversation with your partners to see, what does success even mean? How do we measure that?
Anyone else in the room? Probably time for one more. We'll squeeze in two.
Yeah, thanks for this actionable framework. I had a follow-up question on some of the indicators that you had defined. There were some quantitative ones, such as the number of users you engaged or the number of insights generated, as well as something more qualitative, such as what the engagement has been with their stakeholders. So I'm wondering, how are you able to calculate the metrics? Is it an automatic process, or does it still require manual input?
Yeah. So all of this is automated. So whatever we put it there is all automated. So even with measuring value for us as a research organization, we have an internal stakeholder survey in place to be able to gather those metrics. Yeah.
That's impressive. Thank you.
Cool. I think Alex is showing me time, but it seems like there's one question.
I just had a follow-up to that,
Just a
actually.
quick one, last one.
Yeah, my question was also around indicators. So you mentioned that y'all don't take the dollar value as an indicator right now. So how do you come up with your top three, and how did you pick those, or like why those top three? Does that
Sorry,
make sense?
top three for what?
Indicators
Oh,
to measure success or to measure.
well, I don't think we have a top three. I think that's what so we have a lot. That is why we have a lot, because our indicators mean so many different things to so many different people, and everyone's kind of coming at it with a different lens. So there really wasn't any one or three measures that we could include. We got those 4 categories, and I think that we've nailed down the 4 categories that make sense for us. But we really couldn't narrow it down to just 1 or 2.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Shibani.
Thank you all.
We'll take a quick 2-minute break, and then we'll get going with the panel.
All right, so I'm excited to continue our conversation around research impact. And I am thrilled to introduce our esteemed panel. So first, we have Sancho here. Sancho is the VP of Product Management, responsible for delivering a unified employee experience product across ServiceNow applications and BUs. He has been at ServiceNow for about 6 years, and prior to that was in product and engineering leadership roles at Viva Systems, Salesforce, and Oracle. Welcome, Sancho.
Thank you.
And Prakash Selvaraj. Prakash is the head of platform product experiences at ServiceNow with over 20 years of expertise in user experience and design. He excels at building global design teams and creating award-winning products across mobile, web, and hardware. At Cisco, he led design in the collaboration group across WebEx devices, calling, and contact center. Prakash is known for his system-level thinking, passion for user-centered design, and focus on team health as a driver of innovation. Welcome, Prakash.
Thank you. I didn't realize the bio would be read out loud. By the way.
And Ioana Badea. Ioana is a seasoned leader in global B2B and B2C market research and user experience with a passion for leveraging technology to meet user needs, shape perceptions, and influence behaviors. She excels at building high-impact research teams, developing actionable insights that support every stage of the product lifecycle, and guiding marketing and product strategies through collaborative, consensus-driven decision-making. Currently, Ioana is the Senior Director of Research at Personio, a rapidly growing human resource management company. In this role, she leads end-to-end insights and champions customer centricity, ensuring the company's decisions and strategies are informed by deep, data-driven understanding. Welcome, Ioana.
Thank you.
So our very first question to each of you, and we're going to start thinking about impact, but just generically speaking, what does impact mean for each of you? And we'll start with Sancho.
Okay, it's on. As I think of impact, I ladder down, if you will, from the organization's OKRs, right? And for most B2B software, right, it's some combination of revenue, adoption, and goals, right? And so as I think about what impact my team is going to have, it's always in some way needs to ladder up to one of those.
So you said in general, right?
In general, for your role, what does impact mean?
So I actually was thinking about this while you were talking, and I would say early stages of my career, very similar to what she said. As an IC, as a designer, it was all about my design work and what I put out. But as you transition, and I'm guessing a lot of you are in those kind of stages, you move more towards what Sancho was talking about, right? Which is not just about your individual thing or your team. How is it aligned with the business, kind of that? And a lot of that stuff doesn't come easy. That's where your partners, that you have will keep you honest. So I just want to point that out. That's a very good. You kind of refresh that memory for me. So I'm like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so like Sancho, for me, impact means providing value to the business and being linked with business outcomes. In the current role, if I bring this down back to research, for me, impact means actionable insights that can drive better decision making, and that can be decreasing risks, seeing new opportunities, and it is across the spectrum of marketing and product decision making. It also means enabling the company to be customer centric, and this may be a newer form, if you want, of impact coming from research, but increasingly with the innovation in tools, with all the rise in AI-based capabilities, we enable XFN to be as close as possible to the customer and hear the customer directly. So that's another shape of impact.
That's great. Why is showing impact important? Why is it important for each of you in your roles?
Well, I can start because I have the mic. Well, impact ultimately is value. So it is important to show the value that we bring to the organization. It creates for a meaningful job, and it creates for meaningful relationships and ultimately health for the business. So we want to matter. So impact is that.
I kind of echo the value part, but when you say value, like most of us, I think she dated me by saying 20 years, so that gives you an idea. When we started out, it was about usability engineering, right? It was about, you make the products usable, et cetera. And then we had multiple functions come in, and et cetera. So I think it's our job to constantly, as a larger experience org, to come up with ways that we add value, either in design, research, or other things. So that's why I think it's important. Yeah, otherwise, there will be something else. Gen AI is going to replace us.
So I'll start high, and then I'll go high and low. I think on the high end, or the big picture side, for me, it's about purpose. Right? When you think about the impact of research, ultimately it's about identifying business and user problems that really need to be solved. And if that's what you're doing, that's why we're all in this, right? So I'd say like that's on the one hand. On the other hand, right, it's really about laddering up to business outcomes and answering identifying what are the big unknowns, and are you sort of like reducing the risk and reducing the unknowns around those biggest unknowns. And so it goes back a little bit, as Shibani was saying, to engaging with your stakeholders, understanding how your development cycle works, and then asking them, not just like they have this research project, that's great. They've got a backlog of research project that's even better. But ultimately, like, what are your questions? Like, you've got these big goals. What are you most concerned about? And if you're able to tie research, no matter what the research project is, to those big questions, that's how you show impact, by helping answer questions.
And so the next question, Prakash, you lightly touched on this, so maybe you can start with this, which is, how has your understanding of impact evolved through your career?
So I think I think each one experiences it a bit differently. So I'll use my personal journey kind of thing. It is been very interesting when starting out as an IC, you're looking at how can I add value, right? Just be it a designer, and I'm like, I can do research too. I can do other things too. But then as you get into senior position thing, then you get more into the business side of the house, and like, how do I truly help from a business perspective? that means that's where you start building relationships with your thing. So I think you have an impact in that particular area. And then as you get into management and things, and I think you alluded to it and Anand mentioned it, when you have large organizations, how do you make sure that your organizations are, embodying what you have as a culture, and then they are amplifying the same effect into the organization. So that's a big impact, right? So I think that's what it is. It slightly varies based on where you are, and for me, all of this goes down to culture. Like if you set up the right culture, you're gonna go and learn new things. And of course, it's not a top-down thing. A lot of times, some of the greatest ideas I've received is from actual individuals who were very passionate and interested about it, and they wanted to make an impact, right? So that's my setup for that. I don't know, who do you want to go next?
Ioana?
Sure. So impact changed. There's one trajectory of change which is in the roles that I played. From an IC, a lot focused at that time when I was an IC on answering specific questions in customer sat, in product development, in marketing. And then increasingly, as I went into management and into leadership, impact for me was building healthy, thriving organizations and providing support to the business and the business objectives that we talked about. There is also a change in impact, I believe, in the role the research plays, though, and it kind of follows the changes that happened in the research space, which is always, we are always in change, so it's a matter of driving with the change and thriving through the change. The more recent changes that I've seen in research have been moving from being more of a service-oriented type function into becoming truly partners to the business. I think the best research and the best researchers are working side by side with cross functions, and they all own the product. So it's not like it's someone else's business, it's everybody's business to put out the best product. That has been a change, an inflection that happened, and I'm very excited to see it, because that basically puts research more in the position to drive strategy, to drive implementation, to actually make changes. And I'm actually excited about the next wave, the next inflection point, which is coming through the power of Gen AI and the AI innovation, where I can see research becoming much more focused on unpacking complexity and ambiguity, and less so on maybe task orientation, because all those are going to be possible and are already possible, right? We can test many ideas through AIs, to AI capabilities. AI can generate ideas. We can debate of the quality, right? But those can be accelerated. What cannot be accelerated, so there are certain questions that I don't think are going to be supported fully through these new capabilities, which are more, how do you differentiate? What is unique about the product? What specific capabilities we should go after in terms of prioritization? So that gets me very excited about the road ahead.
That's awesome. And yeah, I'm going to, so maybe Sancho and Prakash, you can talk a little bit more about the AI and the role that you see AI playing in showing impact.
Give it to him, he's more
close. So for me, the big promise of AI is, as Shibani was describing, that backlog of insights, right? If you have a strong research team, and it's not just insights from research, it's also insights from every conversation that's happening with customers, right? Outbound product management, inbound product, customer support, right? The volume of insights you generate is tremendous. And there's going to be a set of insights that you are immediately going to kind of pick up on and prioritize, because maybe that was the problem that you're trying to solve right then. But there are all these other insights that you may have captured, or insights that you may not even have thought of as insights, but are just notes that you've taken that are continue to accumulate. And for me, the huge promise of AI right now, right, with the wave of generative AI and summarization and user understanding, is being able to mine all of that information, right? And to ask questions that weren't asked before. And say, I just had this interesting, there's a new problem that we're trying to solve. We've spoken with 1,000 customers. I'm sure amongst those 1,000 customers, they have been running into this. Like, which customers even, have I heard this problem before? And B, if I haven't, which customer should I go back to and speak to get the insight I'm looking for on this particular problem? So for me, if I were to pick one thing, it's that ability to mine that repository of conversations and insights for new questions as they come up.
I'll go on a slightly different tangent. One of the things we've noticed internally is analytics and telemetry. How do you measure, etc. So we have internally, you know this, we have a program, we have training, we help PMs and designers and everyone to ask the right kind of questions, what kind of measurements I should do and everything. But it's been challenging because not everyone is a data nerd, and it's something where I think Gen AI could play a role in the sense you could ask, like, what are you trying to get out of your telemetry or measurements? And AI could provide options of like, hey, here are ways that you can instrument it. And then we can go have an intelligent conversation with our engineering partners about, and actually you can even automate that part, right? Get it instrumented into the tool itself. Today, it's a very manual process, and we are going through that ourselves. Like, how do we use our telemetry thing and getting into all our product areas? And I can tell you it's inconsistent. Every team is doing it, but it's inconsistent. So how can we get consistency? That's where Gen AI could play a role. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of challenges that we might be facing, but I'm also curious whether here, your current roles or even previous roles, what are the challenges that you faced in measuring impact? And this could be specifically for research, or it could be in your respective roles as well. So curious, what are the challenges that you have faced in your respective areas?
Well, Shimani, you shared many of the challenges that I encountered from a research standpoint in measuring impact. But I look at the impact in 3 buckets. And so I think you had 4 categories. Now, my mental model is 3 buckets. One is the effectiveness of the research itself. And I think that is not a challenge to measure. I think that is something that is must have. Did the research deliver against the stated objectives? Was the research done in time? Was the research done within the budget? So how efficient was it? So those are fundamentals. The second bucket that I look at is sentiment, sentiment measures. How satisfied are our stakeholders with the work? How satisfied is leadership with the work? And I think that is also pretty direct and measurable. For example, in my team, at the end of a project, so similarly, we have a little one-on-one with the stakeholder, if it's a leader, or similarly, through survey, figure out how good the work was. What's the degree of satisfaction? The challenge, this brings me to the challenge. The third bucket is outcome-based measures. And those are probably the most challenging because quantifying them is difficult. They will differ depending on the objectives that are set up front. And they are also hard to quantify. And you shared many of the challenges. And by the way, kudos on the solution that you came up with. And kudos to the service now. It's impressive. And I look forward to hearing the progress on how everything gets logged. But that is one of the challenges, like having the tools and having the discipline and the behaviors that can enable quantification of the outcome-based measures. Because under outcome-based measures is where I see things like, what was the actual decision that was changed based on the research? What were the recommendations that made it to the product or to design? And the most difficult of all, actually, is the long-term value. How do we measure long-term value? Because sometimes a research that was done in a certain domain turns out it is useful in a different area. So keeping track of that and keeping track of insights that have longevity over time, especially when it comes to looking at trends, looking at opportunities, long-term, more generative research. So that's where I think the challenges are. And again, kudos for the solution.
I'll just say a single one, which is the stakeholders, right? How do you make sure that each stakeholder is getting value out of it, right? And you kind of alluded to it. I think that's going to be a constant challenge because it's a very human aspect. Each one is different. So the part of leaning in and frequently going and talking to your stakeholders, even if they don't listen to you the first time, the second time, the third time, I think that's something that I think is going to be an ongoing human element until we are all replaced by robots. I think that's going to be there. So that's my.
From a product perspective, like there are very few products where you can tie it to, or I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of products that you can tie to revenue. It is very hard to tie like particular capabilities, epics, stories, features to revenue. But ultimately, like that's, we're a public company, right? We just closed our quarter in a month where, Bill McDermott is going to be, is going to be reporting our numbers to the street. Like that's our number one, like our top line sort of measure of value that we're delivering as an organization. And so for me, I think about leading indicators, right? Like what are the things that what are the indicators that are suggesting that this particular capability is adding value, right? And so we look at things like adoption amongst customers. We look at things like usage of the feature. So for us, it's we're a B2B product. Our customers deploy it to their users. The users can choose to use it or not use it, right? So for my team, we're focused more on those leading indicators. Revenue is great, but at that feature level, at that product level, right, our customers actually getting value and our users getting value from that initiative.
Okay, I want to shift gears and focus more on UX research impact. And I'm curious from your perspective, if you can share a story each where you have seen UX research have a really great impact in each of your areas.
I'll use something currently. We are dealing with, by the way, I'm in a platform design organization. So we are a hub which supports our BUs. So that means we have a lot of bosses because everyone wants something out of platform. And one of the things that we've been doing, and with our research partner in hand, is how do we really make an impact, like get ahead of the curve? Like there are a lot of these great things that the BU researchers bring in. So one of the asks was, how do we bring all the research that's happening on the BU side into the platform discussion? But the other big part is product discovery. So this is one of those things I feel like it is nothing about validating, nothing about how our products are doing, etc. Just even go discover a space which we don't know anything about. Like you can call it market research, but I'm calling it as product research because that's the lens we use. I feel like that's a big area that our research organization need to lean in more because it's very helpful. It helps our product team, it helps design. So that's been my latest trend of Shivani knows this. We have amazing platform researchers, and every time I'm leaning in and asking okay, I know we did this, but how will it contribute to our larger discovery related stuff? So that's been my latest one.
So I own employee experience products at ServiceNow. And when you think employee, there's actually a pretty broad variety of personas within that employee persona. But until recently, we had some kind of tailoring to different personas, but generally we delivered as a platform, and then our customers say, okay, I've got this, I've got a factory worker versus a nurse versus a retail store associate, and tailoring that experience to those different personas. Late last year, we kicked off an initiative to really focus on deskless workers, and we use that as the broad category. And it was a great example of working really, really closely with our research partners to first narrow down from even that broad persona sort of definition of deskless worker to within deskless workers, nurses need different things from truck drivers, from store associates, from factory workers, to start to identify, okay, across all of these, which are we going to focus on? And it's not a pure research thing because you got to align it to the business priorities, right? We've got to focus on manufacturing, and in particular CPG manufacturing. So maybe we'll start there, and then leaning in with those customers. And then it's always hard to get a hold of those factory workers directly, but through proxies, right? Who at the customer has spent time with their factory workers? What are the issues that they've encountered? What are the pain points that the organization is facing? as it relates to those factory workers, and then using that to really prioritize the product approach that we took for a solution that is really designed for those manufacturing production associates. They're called, and that was an example of really great collaboration. That product is, of all the products I've worked on recently, that's one that is it resonates immediately with customers. You get up in front of a customer, you put up the experience, and you start to speak to it. You list out the problems that you've heard during research from other customers like them, and you get the head nods. You're like, yep. I list off, I'm like, these are the 3 use cases. It's time off, it's pay, it's questions around HR, and they go, yep, those are the 3, right? And then you know that you've delivered value, right? That your product research is aligned with, kind of discovered the right, it helped you identify really the key use cases to solve for your customers.
Well, there are many examples. So I will probably focus on some examples where along the product continuum. Personally, I get the most joy from the example that you had on generative and understanding where the opportunity is. So broad and narrowing down to actual use cases. This happened a lot in my past at Meta, where I was, my team was working primarily on more strategic initiatives and looking ahead in terms of where should Meta and Facebook specifically, I should say Facebook specifically, what use cases should we go after? Research was instrumental, and in fact, the collaboration between research and design was instrumental, because in understanding the opportunities, understanding the market, and starting to define the use cases and the needs, we were very closely with design, already to figure out what could be some concepts and start to test and narrow down. So do that narrowing of the funnel. Another example comes more from the usability side, where research can be instrumental. And here I actually think it could be quantified down to maybe attaching to revenue or business outcomes when research is informing the acquisition funnel and figuring out how, for example, the website is designed in a certain way that it's going to attract customers in and it's going to move them down the funnel. Doing pre and post experiments and understanding how, based on the research learning, the numbers are moving in the right direction, of course, and then calculating that. So that's an example coming from usability, or web testing, concept testing in the web design space. And I can go on into measures, but I think you have other questions.
Well, so I'm curious, in each of your stories, what were those strategies that you found to really help research be successful in landing that impact? What worked really well? And so we'll start with you, Anna.
Yeah. You touched on it. I think collaboration is critical. Well, there are a couple of things, but I'd start with collaboration being critical. However, in the order of, like, if I up level, I think the first thing is working on the right things. So having alignment at the product leadership level, at the team level, on why doing a certain body of research is important. So that alignment, making sure that the effort is put on the highest ROI problem, I think it's critical. So then from there, the criticality of collaboration. It's important for research to be working very, very closely, cross-functionally, and I think we have examples here. And it's also important for research, for our partners to be immersed in research. I think the best success stories I've seen in my career happened when our partners really saw the reaction of a user or of a customer because they traveled with us, virtually or actually. Decisions get faster, the empathy gets built in the moment, and then we don't actually need to bring all sorts of evidence to the arguments we make. It's just, it's human nature. We see it together, and we are sharing in that moment of experience. So I think collaboration and being together, having common objectives, common goals, working as one team are critical.
So I'll continue on the story of the current project, right? You wanted specifics on that. I don't think I'm disclosing anything that is internal. We have something about interoperability, meaning how well things work across our platform. And the first thing was defining what that was challenging because internally, what the BU thinks, what our platform engineering thinks, what our own product things or design things was very different. So one of the first things we had to do was like come up with a common alignment around what do we mean by interoperability. And so think of it like coming up with your hypothesis, right? So we collected all that. But then our research team actually engaged with customers and we already had something else planned and they were able to pivot quickly and use some of these hypotheses we had in the conversations. And to your point, we were all invited to these, we were observers in those sessions. So we have a product person in there, design, etc. Just sitting and watching and how they stumbled through the thing and etc. made us all like better empathize. So now we have like right after a session we have another session for us to collect the notes, and you would see the amount of engagement that goes on because first off, everyone aligned. Oh, we had to tweak our hypothesis because what we thought versus what we are hearing from the customers is different. So those are the kind of things where I feel like research actually is able to adjust based on where the needs are. And that's something that I value because I wouldn't have known that because I was just going to them and saying, we have this, how might we fit it in? How do we quickly adapt, right? So, but I liked your point about having a product partner sit in there because now it's not a question of a report being presented because they actually heard it. Even though we can put presentations and quotes and big text, etc., just hearing and watching them is so powerful. So we try to encourage more of that internally also.
The way my team works with research, the researchers are definitely the experts. Like you guys know all the strategies, like you guys know the right questions, the right techniques to use for different situations. But I see research and product research and problem understanding, user understanding as a joint ownership ultimately. Right? Because as a product manager, you cannot deliver good products if you don't know your customers, you don't know your users. And so if I think back to this example of this factory worker experience, right? It really started with that joint ownership, a conversation across product, design, engineering. We said like, this is a problem that we need to solve. What do we know? What do we not know? In that case, as I described earlier, we had a lot of customers that were already doing it. So it's like, okay, well, let's start with the customers that are already solving this problem. The product team has those contexts. Like, I know those customers. I know who solved it. I know which ones are friendlier, which ones I already have relationships with. So like, I will do that outreach to that customer and go, hey, we'd like to understand what you're doing here so that we can figure out how we can make your lives easier. Maybe there are SIs, partners that have also solved this problem. So the product team plays a role in kind of like making some of those connections. And then research kind of starts to ramp up as we do that outreach, right? Research is helping bring the right strategies, helping with the script so that we're not asking the leading questions, we're asking those open-ended questions, so we're getting the right directional insights. And then as we kind of progress through that journey, research leans in more and more, right? Now research will take over those conversations. Okay, we've talked to customers that are friendlies, that have solved it. Now let's go talk to customers that haven't solved it. Now research is going to take point on that, right? And lead those conversations in partnership. I love attending those calls. Maybe my research partner doesn't love it as much, but I love attending those calls because I'm jumping in with additional questions and nudging them on the side on Teams so that we're getting those additional information. And then we kept using different strategies, right? We used those open-ended conversations. We developed concepts. We took those back to start to do some concept resonance testing with the users. We developed some more. It was hard to get to our customers, end users, right? If I'm a factory worker in Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, working on Cheerios for General Mills, like we're not going to get a hold of them, but we can do Gen Pop, right? So we actually went out and did some Gen Pop recruiting, and we found users with a similar profile, and we tested it, and our customers absolutely loved it because they didn't need to test with their users, but we were able to bring insights from testing with users like their users. So I think it was a great example of using different kinds of strategies, but it all kind of centered on that really close collaboration across product, design, research, and engineering.
So definitely a common thread here. Collaboration is a winning strategy. So I'm going to open up to questions from the audience here. We also have some questions online. So I'll start with a question that we got online. Is there a time where a researcher, and this is from Aaliyah, thank you, Aaliyah. Is there a time where a researcher drove impact that was so substantial that it changed the way that you wanted to partner with them?
So that's a tough question for me to answer because I've never not wanted to work with research, right?
You're a good partner to have.
And I definitely see research as part of that collaboration. And so I'm going to punt by not answering that question.
I think the answer is pretty much most researchers, right? You work with a lot of different folks. They all bring different lens to it. Let me use you because people know you. She's on the business unit side. I'm on the platform side. But a lot of times Shivani definitely reaches out. And this was not about insights. This was about defects. How do you measure quality? And I really loved that you reached out and wanted to address this because we had to do this together. This is not something a business unit can address by itself. Platform has to do it. So there are a lot of these opportunities where, and I'm using Shivani because she's here, but there are the Sagarikas and the Snehas and a lot of our researchers who do this because we value research so much here that we take it for granted sometimes. So I just want to make sure that's not the case everywhere. So I'll highlight that.
Iwana, I think I would love to ask you this question. This is from Terry. Now, given your experience in a number of different research organizations and setting up research teams, what Terry is asking is, in a legacy org that is new to UX and user-centered design, are there any steps prior to the approach that we've shared here today that can generate initial curiosity and openness to research and, in general, evidence-based design decisions?
Yeah, great question. Because not all organizations are embracing research so overtly. I think it is important to start with the win. So embrace that strategy of figuring out what is going to show the value of research and the power of research for the organization. And this comes down to really understanding the needs, so the needs of the partners that you are working with, speaking their language, and then showing them how the research is going to support their business objectives, business outcomes. For example, in the executive, always with the executive team, the leadership team, revenue matters, concrete business objectives matter and contribution to those. So being able to link and even visualize, at least in my experience, visualizing outcomes coming from research helps bridge with the understanding of the stakeholders. So even mocking up, like, here is what you are going to get and why this is important to you and how it's going to help you. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah. And I can also share an example from my experience. A lot of times our partners don't know the questions they need to be asking of us. And so really it's on us to figure out where are they trying to go, what are their ultimate goals, and what do they already know, but what might they not know that maybe they're not asking about. But those are the questions that we should be asking. And so we need to figure out a way to get those. So an example I can give from my previous experience was we were working on developing products. It's a well-established product, but the more I asked questions about the persona, the more I realized I got a lot of, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. And so I realized, okay, here's an opportunity for me to go out and run some more research to figure out who are these personas. And I did that without anyone telling me to do that. But I realized there was a need, and I did it, and and they are still using that research even today. So just figuring out where is the business going and where can you add value.
But you are touching on something very important, which is being proactive and kind of entrepreneurial, right? Seeing what the need is or what's the gap. A lot of times there is a lack of understanding, and you see that. I mean, that's our job as researchers, highly observant, and seeing where the gaps are, not being afraid to take that step and fill that gap, because the partners are going to thank you for it. Yeah, great example.
Any questions here in the room? Yeah. Here, or I can repeat it too.
Yeah, I just want to pull on a thread that you mentioned there about looking at what your stakeholders know or don't know. How do you, and this is probably for the researchers and then design and product too, but how do you overcome knowledge bias? You have a lot of research, you have a lot of past research. So where do you find those knowledge gaps, or do you have an approach to do that?
Yeah, so I've run workshops in the past where we, I call them learning plan workshops, and I say, hey, stakeholders, what do you want to learn? And where do you feel like you have the biggest gaps in your knowledge? And I might come back with some questions of my own, and they may say, well, we already know this. I say, okay, well, can I see the data around it? And most times there isn't any data. But that's a good signal then for us to say, okay, and it's a good signal for them too to say, maybe that's still a question that we should be asking, or at least validating. Maybe we're 50% sure, maybe we're even 80% sure, but let's still go out and ask about that. But it's really trying to get everybody in the room and to do kind of a brain dump of what is it that they know, what is it that they don't know, how confident are they in what they know and what they don't know.
Yeah, so I think similarly, I'm going to build on what Shivani is saying. I really love to do interviews, one-on-one. Workshops work too, depending on what is the situation. But personally, I like to do one-on-ones and really try to understand what are the objectives, the business objectives, the product objectives of those stakeholders. For a couple of reasons. Number one, it's always interesting to see if they are aligned in their understanding of the objectives they have for the product. And probably not surprisingly, or maybe it is, but sometimes they are not actually. And I'm seeing different perspectives in terms of what are they trying to achieve. Usually the OKR, like the objective, the official objective is consistent. But how they think it's going to be reached can vary. And more importantly, what is the risk in the decisions they are trying to make? Those are going to be varying. So I'm trying to understand that, usually through interviews, and then bring them together and start to have a conversation in terms of, here are some things that I'm observing and I'm hearing. Maybe this is what could help you, and that would be the contribution from research. It does come down to having an active dialogue and really showing them why you think that the research is going to help move forward the decisions that they are trying to make.
So my question is, how do you push the importance of research to subject experts? Like, let's say your stakeholders are subject experts and they believe that they know what users want.
Actually, it's very similar to what she said about
Yeah,
knowledge bias.
Yeah, it is kind of treading on similar lines.
I'm going to use an internal phrase which some folks will understand, but we have the term ServiceNow OGs, old guards who are been here long, they know everything. It's a lot of tribal knowledge, etc. So you got to appeal to their sense of why whatever we are recommending or why we think research is needed here in a slightly different way than to someone who's relatively new and is open to ideas, right? I liked your point about one-on-one interviews, but one of the things we tend to do before any big meeting, right? We tend to have smaller meetings with, it is a lot of work, but the one thing is you want the best outcome out of your larger meeting. So you tend to do smaller sessions with your product folks so that make sure, let's say it's Sancho is the big boss we want to talk to. We would talk with his team first, make sure that we are all aligned, etc. And what are his concerns through his team, make sure that's lined up. So we had to do that quite a bit because it depends on the person. If they have a lot of experience, they've been here, quite some time, it's a very different perspective than folks who are. So we just have to, and especially when they're all in the same meeting, you literally have to switch to make sure that I know he cares about this, I know she cares about this. So coaching up either as an individual or as your team presenting, know your audience. That's the main thing, and do the prep work. So
I'll give a different variation of that, right? I think your approach. I love all the knowledge workshops, the interviews, exactly what you do with your, with like your subjects. You should do that with your stakeholders to identify what they know, what they think they know, and what they think they don't know, right? But how you then, like your next steps from that, I think will be very different if you're talking with a peer versus an executive stakeholder, right? If it's with a peer, you can challenge, right? Say like, do you really, like let's go figure this out together. Like how confident are you in that information? If it's an executive, that's probably not a winning move, right? If they're confident in a particular fact, like you don't get anything out of challenging them on that. But there are things that they're not confident on. And so you want to focus on what they're not confident on, but while you're doing that, you've got an eye on what they think they're confident on. And then when you come back and report out to them, like if you just ran a whole study to confirm something they already know, you've probably lost credibility. Because it's like, what did you just do for the last 10 weeks or 6 weeks or 2 weeks, however long it took? But if you come back to them with insights, new things, new information that they weren't aware of, and then along the way, you can say, either I confirmed, as we did this, we confirmed this, or we confirmed part of it, we learned something different, right? It's really important to kind of meet them where they're at and bring them along on that journey with you, but your approach needs to be tailored to where they are in the organization and your relationship with them.
One more question online. So this question is from Marie. What if leadership is satisfied, stakeholders are satisfied, but as a leader or as a researcher, you're not satisfied with the impact that you have landed? And it doesn't seem to be changing anything despite all the great work that you think you've done. What do you do?
I would say type A personality for sure. Well, let me reflect for a second. So everyone is satisfied, but you are not satisfied.
Because you're not seeing anything change.
Because you are not seeing anything change. Well, if you have conviction, well, there are two, right? There's the possibility that maybe things don't need to change, and you may not understand the reasons why they are not changing. One of the things that I think sometimes we do as researchers, we have a very strong conviction behind the learning that we have, and we sometimes don't take the time to understand what other considerations might need to be made in the decision to ship a product or to improve something. I think we were talking earlier about priorities at the end of the day. So sometimes it's not that the research was bad, and that's the reason why the action is not taking, or the individuals don't want to take the action. There are other considerations that are trumping the research results, and therefore the action is not taken. But it may be taken later. So this takes me to the second part. So if there is conviction behind that, then I would say stay with it and build a point of view, figure out why the change has not happened, and don't lose it, because your partners will appreciate you for it. I don't know if
I don't have a question, but I wanted to say this before you all get bombarded by a bunch of people. Thank you, because Sanjo, you said that you love collaborating with research, but that's not common. In my experience working in enterprise companies, that's not common at all. So it just, first of all, it solidifies how much I would love to work here. But also, thank you for just being the org that you all are, because that means that some researchers have a high UX maturity place to work with great people, and they do get to work here. And it gives me hope that ServiceNow could be an industry leader and maybe make that impact on other companies to start doing that as well. So thank you. Thank you.
It was very well curated. Well, thank you. Oh, thank you for that. I think we can end on that. First of all, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. I learned a lot. Hopefully, you all learned a lot. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Shivani, for the presentation. Thank you, Alec, for co-hosting this with us, learners. And please, there's some more wine. There's a lot of wine. It shouldn't be the case. Some cheese, some good food. So let's please hang out, talk to us. I'm going to be here myself for some time. So that's it. Thank you all.